Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Wayne Tanaka. I am the current executive director of the Sierra Club of Hawaiʻi, and I have the great privilege to be your moderator for today's webinar, which will feature some amazing leaders here in Hawaii, reflecting on our Red Hill water crisis and what it may take really to protect this most precious resource here in Hawaii, throughout Oceania and across the planet. And I think this conversation is perhaps more vital now than ever before, right? As water, as most of us know, is the primary medium through which we will feel the effects of climate destabilization. And as we realize that the threats to this resource, this source of life, are rooted in the same systems and the same legacies that are now threatening our planet and humanity as a whole. Uh, and um, and before we begin, I'd just like to take a moment to set the stage by giving a brief background on the Red Hill fuel facility and Red Hill water crisis, since folks may not all be familiar with it. So I will share my screen. Yeah, there we go. There's here in Hawaii, there's a fuel facility, a giant underground storage fuel facility that was built in the early 1940s. So from 1940 to 1943, this is it's composed of 25-story tall fuel tanks that can each hold 12.5 million gallons. So it has a total capacity of 250 million gallons of fuel. This is, marine diesel, jet fuel, other oil-based products. This facility was built just 100 feet above our sole source aquifer, which is the primary drinking water source for the island of Oʻahu. So for about a million plus people. And it was also located within a mile of the one of the main municipal water wells. So the Board of Water Supply's Halava shaft, which, at one point in time served 20% of Honolulu's water needs. These tanks, when they were new, were built with a steel liner to contain the fuel, and this liner is only a 1/4 inch thick. So if you imagine shrinking one of these tanks down to the size of a hydro flask, the steel liner wall of that each tank would be less than the thickness of tinfoil. And as we've found out, more recently, this liner was corroding much more rapidly than people had anticipated, largely because of the water that would infiltrate the facility and get trapped against the steel liner wall. In 2021, when this crisis really started, 8 of the tanks had been uninspected in over 2 decades, right? So the industry standard is inspect underground storage tanks every 10 years. Some had not been inspected in over 40 years. And prior to November 2021, we had reports, recorded amount of fuel that was released from this facility as at 180,000 gallons. And that was a conservative estimate because that was only based on on reports that had quantified how much fuel was released. So looking at other things like anecdotal reports at estimated chronic release rates. Some folks, including state officials, think that up to 2 million gallons may have been released from this facility over its 80-year lifespan, and most of that is not accounted for. So it's somewhere in the environment. Yeah. And again, this facility is 100 feet above our primary drinking water source. In 2014, 27,000 gallon spill was reported from this facility. This led to an administrative order on consent between the Navy, the Hawaii Department of Health, and the Environmental Protection Agency, and that we will be discussing this AOC in a little further depth today. In 2017, the Sierra Club actually sued the Department of Health to require this underground storage tank facility to be permitted, to be regulated. It had actually never been permitted under state law, even though that was a requirement, and that was actually binding too on the federal government. We prevailed, and so the Navy was forced to apply for a permit, which we then challenged. We were joined by the Board of Water Supply and the Environmental Health Administration with the Department of Health. And because of delays with the Department of Health's permit processing, the Navy's permit was going to get automatically approved. So we had to sue again, and we prevailed. and then had a contested case hearing, evidentiary hearing in 2021. I'd like to note, and we'll talk about this more later, but the administrative order consent, as of this day, really is not complete in many of its respects, right? We have no groundwater flow model, contaminant treat and transport model. Risk assessment was only partially done. Lots of other unfulfilled commitments in that document. So as I mentioned, we had a contested case hearing that began in 2019. It had to be we had an evidentiary hearing in 2021, but the hearing itself was initiated in 2019. So it took over a year to actually get to the the meat of that process. While that was pending in March 2020, an active leak began from the facility that was actually not disclosed during our contested case hearing, unfortunately. Commander Darrell Frame with the Navy under oath claimed that there had been no active leaks since the 2013 spill, which later turned out to be incorrect. In May of 2021, there's another spill reported at the facility, and then in October of that year, a whistleblower came forward, basically alleging gross mismanagement of this massive field facility. Separately, the Department of Health did a routine inspection, really the first inspection of this facility ever, and came out with a $325,000 notice of violation. And then in November 21, there was another spill, which we now know was tied to the May spill, and that spill basically led to the contamination of our aquifer and of the Navy's, ironically, the Navy's drinking water system. And so this is a heat map of of reports of health impacts after that November 2021 spill. As you can see, the Navy system is fairly expansive. It encompasses all of Pearl Harbor and even goes to some civilian housing in Kapilina, which is like the southernmost blob on this map. The Navy's water system served about 93,000 people, including schools and businesses. Thousands of people were essentially displaced from their homes because of the toxicity of the fuel, and about 6,000, a little more than 6,000 people reported health effects in the immediate aftermath. Things like nausea, vomiting, reproductive health issues, hair loss, and really right now we don't know what the long-term effects will be of this exposure because it just doesn't happen. Like jet fuel is not supposed to be in your drinking water, and there's a registry now that's been stood up to kind of track the long-term health outcomes for the folks that were exposed. Even to this day, after the Navy flushed their water system, we're still getting reports of intermittent sheens and symptoms, and that's also another cause for concern currently. One thing that's being really emphasized by folks who've been tracking this is the need to provide notice to the families that are moving here and getting on the Navy's water system. Meanwhile, the Navy continues to basically deflect or deny concerns that something may still be wrong. Meanwhile, the families that were poisoned continue to be gaslit, in court and in public statements by the Department of Defense. More subsequent to the November spill, the facility was finally ordered defueled by the Hawaii Department of Health. The Pentagon resisted, but finally in March 22, the Pentagon on its own ordered the closure of this facility. It recognized that a World War II fuel storage facility that's already poisoned its service members' families probably does not need to be operating. And then in November, we had another spill, this time of AFFF, so aqueous film forming foam concentrate, and this concentrate was utilized as PFAS or forever chemicals. And as you can see in the picture on the right, the response was to cover the spill with tarp to prevent it from rain from percolating it down into the ground. Unfortunately, it was very, very rainy that night. I remember staying up all night, thinking about what was happening with this AFFF. The next year, the EPA and Navy entered into a 2023 administrative consent order, which for many just kind of repeated the same weaknesses of the 2015 administrative order and consent. The one thing it did do differently was establish a Red Hill community representation initiative of community members to engage directly with Navy and EPA representatives. So the current status, what are we looking at? We have, fortunately, the Department of Defense, Department of War now has removed approximately 104 million gallons of fuel from the facility. They are in the process of removing the sludge that remains in the tanks, literally shoveling it into barrels that are then shipped off as hazardous waste. There is ongoing removal of the pipelines, like miles and miles of pipelines that connected this facility to Pearl Harbor. Some of the pipelines will have to stay in place, and there are concerns about what they're using to deal with the residual fuel in those pipes. Well over 3 billion gallons of water have been essentially pumped from the Navy's drinking water well and dumped into Halawa Stream. This was an effort to contain the plume. Unfortunately, we don't know where this plume is, right? We don't have enough monitoring wells. We don't have a groundwater flow model. We don't have a contaminant feed and transport model that was promised by the Navy 10 years ago. And so we're kind of like in this desperate situation where we're trying to drop as many monitoring wells as we can just to figure out where this plume is so that we don't threaten the municipal water supply. And one thing that's really concerning is there really doesn't seem to be much investment at all in figuring out how they're going to remediate this plume, to clean it up once we figure out where it is. And I do want to note that, for the thousands of folks that were harmed, many of them continue to experience, physical hardship, mental health issues, and financial harm, financial insecurity, which unfortunately is not being addressed in a timely manner. And so that's kind of, right. And then I wanted to, take a step back and note that the Pentagon is now pushing for expedited, fast-tracked land deal to retain public lands, really stolen Hawaiian Kingdom lands that have been used for live fire training for the last 6 decades. That training has been occurring under leases with the state of Hawaii, which are expiring in 2029. And so I think this situation that we're in, along with many of the other challenges that we've been facing with contamination and other issues with the Department of Defense, is going to lead to some very interesting conversations around this attempt of the Army or the Department of Defense to retain its lands in Hawaii. And so that's in a nutshell. And there's many other issues and details I've left out just for brevity, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what we're currently dealing with here on Oʻahu and in Hawaii. And yeah, so let's get into it. If you have any questions during this webinar, please place them in the Q&A, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can also place them in the comments there. We'll try to answer them, all the questions we can at the end. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So first we have the manager and chief engineer of the Board of Water Supply, Ernie Lau. He's been with the Board of Water Supply since 2012. And as I mentioned before, the Board of Water Supply is the municipal water utility for Oʻahu, which is the most populous island in Hawaii. It's responsible for serving nearly 1 million people with safe drinking water every single day. And it's been around since 1929. Ernie has been the leading voice in government calling for the protection of our water from the Red Hill facility since the 2013 spill, essentially. It's not an easy thing to do here in Hawaii with a political environment that has been almost completely deferential to the U.S. military. But, Ernie and his team's actions before and during and after the, and during the ongoing crisis, everything from immediately shutting down the threatened wells, talking to the news, giving us updates every single day, keeping us informed, and continuing to engage with the Navy and the EP and the Department of Health, has led many people here in Hawaii, including myself, to call him a hero, because that's what he is. And really an anomaly among public servants here, although, I really like to believe that he needs to be a trailblazer for his, colleagues and others in government. Yeah, and thank you so much for joining us, Ernie. Next, we have Marti Townsend. She is the Community Engagement Specialist at the Earthjustice Mid-Pacific office, and she is the former executive director of the Sierra Club of Hawaiʻi, as well as Kahea, the Hawaiian Environmental Alliance, and the Outdoor Circle. She's an attorney, and she's been organizing for 25 years and has led successful campaigns to help protect Mauna Kea, to defend Native Hawaiian water rights, to establish our environmental courts system, and to create the Papahanao Mokuakea Marine National Monument, among many, many other accomplishments. Most recently, she has helped advance the landmark Navahine versus Hawaii Department of Transportation climate lawsuit and settlement. And, really, I came into this late in the game with respect to Red Hill. Like Ernie, Marti has been a true champion in building up the foundation for the groundswell of action that occurred after the November 2021 catastrophe. And yeah, based on her years of advocacy alongside Ernie since the 2014 release. Next, we have Natali Segovia. She is an international human rights attorney who currently serves as the executive director of the Water Protector Legal Collective, which is an indigenous-led legal organization that grew out of the no DAPL resistance at Standing Rock. Today, the Water Protector Legal Collective continues to provide legal support and advocacy for indigenous peoples, for the earth, and for climate justice movements. Natali's work focuses on the protection of the earth and the rights of indigenous peoples and frontline communities affected by forced displacement, desecration of sacred lands, and human rights violations as a result of extractive industry, corporate development projects, and militarization. In 2022, she was named the Livable Distinguished Public Interest Lecturer at Northeastern University School of Law. She holds a law degree from Arizona State University, as well as degrees in political science and Latin American studies from Columbia University. She serves on the scientific committee of the Monique and Roland Weil People's Academy of International Law and on the board of directors for Indigenous Peoples' Rights International. She's also been a regular Red Hill advocate, sharing in her testimonies and presentations and through her networks the international and human rights implications of this crisis and of the Navy's actions. And finally, we have Kainoa Azama. He hails from He'ea, Oʻahu, so not too far from where I am today. He is continuing the legacy of his kupuna, his elders who fought for land, water, and the reestablishment of the lawful Hawaiian government, which was illegally overthrown in 1893. Kainoa continues to engage from a grassroots level as well as all the way up to an international level. And he is rooted in the philosophy of Hewa'a he moku, he moku hewa'a, which means a canoe is an island and an island is a canoe. Kainoa recognizes that, like an island, island Earth has limited resources, and for us to successfully navigate our future in this island, in these islands, will require the wisdom and relationships that serve our Mother Earth, that serve our children, our women, and our planet. Kainoa was also one of the leading organizers and advocates in the Shutdown Red Hill campaign. And really years before that, when I first saw him in action, I was just blown away, as were many of my colleagues at the Office of Foreign Affairs, and I'm sure you will all see why during this webinar. And so let's, without further ado, let's get into it. So I will ask some questions of our panelists to reflect on. And first, for Ernie, can you tell us a little bit about Oʻahu's water? What makes it so special and so important for the people of this island?
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Wayne. Where the island of Oʻahu is the most populated island in Hawaii, and with nearly a million people here, we're in the middle of the Pacific, so we can't go to another state and get freshwater resources. We have to depend on the water resources that are here, and it all originates as rain falling on our island. This precious ua is the source of our recharge of our underground aquifers. And on a daily basis, on average, we have to produce about 145 million gallons a day of clean fresh water to meet the needs of almost a million people on this island. It also creates a situation that below many of our feet where we live and we work, if you go deep underground, you'll see the underground aquifer with that fresh water that we depend on. So what we do at the ground level, above the ground, what we put into the ground, into the earth, into the Aina, can someday contaminate our own freshwater, precious water resources. So we're in the situation being an island Our water resources are below our feet. We need to take care of that resource and protect it from contamination, or we're going to be in trouble. Our drinking water will be contaminated, and we'll have to spend a lot of money on treatment systems if it's even possible. So it poses an interesting dynamic in our community, where to put military facilities, where to put landfills in the future. That could be a major source of contamination too. Thanks, Wayne.
Uh, Thank you, Ernie. Kainoa, would you like to add any manao of your own?
Sure. In terms of water, I'll add like a little bit of the cultural view of it onto everything. But one of the things that I think is really important about water and our worldview that was shared to me by different kupuna is, one thing that we define as sacred. And it's interesting how we visit that definition of sacred. I think some people, they always think from like a religious, dogmatic kind of perspective. But for us, what's sacred to us is oftentimes what's pertinent and important for the continuity of life. So when it comes to this idea of water as sacred, of course it's sacred. You can't live without it. And one of the things that I really deeply root myself from too in that understanding is we often talk about how in this world, for everything physical, there's also something spiritual, right? Nothing's ever solely one thing. So when we think about water, one of the understandings from one of the kupuna that shared with me is, the physical manifestation of akua, of the divine energy, in that sense, the divine being is water. So in that understanding, when NASA is searching for life in so many other places, and we talk about the new space age and all these other things, you can't find water, you can't find spirit in any other place except this particular place that we live in, where it has been able to nourish life. So I think for us, we need to look at it, it's time to stop really looking on the outside for solutions and for one all, cure all, be alls, and start really looking at this planet and looking at this place as something we need to nourish and change our relationship. Water isn't something that we should ever waste. It takes care of our needs, as Ernie was sharing, and again, to honor that sacred being, and to honor its role for the continuity of this life. Yeah, mahalo.
Mahalo, Kainoa. Um, yeah, one thing that really struck me throughout, through this campaign is in connecting with other communities dealing with water, with trying to protect their water, and it really does seem like, this understanding of the sacredness of this resource and the preciousness is something shared by many folks and many peoples. And maybe Natalie, can you maybe you can talk a little more about the similarities in this cultural understanding of wai in Hawaii with that of indigenous folks, in other places.
Yeah, thanks so much, Wayne. It's beautiful to hear Kainoa share that manao from the elders that he's learned from. And, similarly, the organization that I lead, Water Protector Legal Collective, we started at Standing Rock, right? This like movement and historic indigenous-led resistance that galvanized the world because people said we can't drink oil. And that's the same, right? In Hawaii, we can't drink oil, right? And that's across the world. And one of the things that we know of oil pipelines, but we're also learning, right, of other kinds of infrastructure, USTs, right, underground storage tanks, like all of these other kinds of infrastructure, is that they're man-made. The propensity is that eventually, as we say, all pipelines leak, right? But in that acknowledgement and underlying that acknowledgement, what we saw at Standing Rock was this global call of water is life, or Mini Wachoni, right? This idea that not only is water life, but it's the first water, and that unifies all of us globally. That is a story that Lakota elder often shares, and he talks about how in Lakota traditions, Makaegana is the first water of life, which brings you to life, right, as a human being. And that in that sense, we are all connected because we come from water. And that's reflected in the need that we have for water, right? You can go without food, but you really can't go without water. And so we recognize in indigenous worldviews that there's a commonality and a common thread that runs across the globe. And that is that water is sacred, right? not just a resource, not just a commodity, not just something you can trade on the stock market, but a relative. And as part of that also comes an obligation to protect. There's a duty and a responsibility to protect. But I think that burden, and I think that's one of the most powerful things I've seen in the organizing that's happened in response to Red Hill in Hawaii has been not just, indigenous led, right? The burden shouldn't fall just on indigenous peoples time and time again. There needs to be a call constantly for allyship. And we're in a time where environmental rollbacks are more and more frequent, where even the regulations, right? PFAS we've known as a carcinogenic since the 1940s. Everybody has probably seen Erin Brockovich, right? We've seen Dark Waters. We've seen the movies that have like infused the cultural understanding and popular cultural understanding of these issues and contaminants that affect our waters. And yet PFAS is still not a regulated substance as a hazardous substance under RCRA and some of the main laws federally, right, that are meant to protect water, and are meant to protect health and human safety, that are meant to protect the earth. So, going a little bit astray of your question, Wayne, but it is that responsibility, and I think that we have to understand that also as a collective duty. And I think that's the call that Indigenous peoples in Hawaii and beyond are making and are calling for today.
Yeah, I think in many folks now in retrospect are recognizing that wisdom, right? And that is embodied in so many different understandings. But yet, for so long, like in many other places, the Red Hill facility, that what is that ticking time bomb was allowed to persist over our water, our source of life. I mean, Ernie and Marty, maybe you can, so you were the ones that were sounding the alarm well before people even knew what was going on, and maybe can you share a little bit about the threats that you saw that this facility posed, and maybe even why you think that the Navy was allowed to continue operating the Red Hill facility, notwithstanding these threats.
Marty, would you like to go first?
No, you can go first. I'll jump in after.
Okay. Yeah, so my journey in Red Hill started 11 years ago, January 2014, when we were informed about the leak of jet fuel from tank number 5 at the Red Hill facility. And it was kind of eye-opening to realize that there was a facility capable of storing 250 million gallons of fuel 100 feet above our precious water resources in that area. It was shocking. It was really only declassified in the mid-90s. So prior to that, it was secret. Nobody really knew about it. But then when we first learned about it and started to ask questions, I think at that point we realized that, as I said to 6 legislative committees holding a hearing on Red Hill at the legislature, our state legislature, this is a disaster waiting to happen. And unfortunately, years later, that disaster came to fruition, and thousands of people suffered injury and are still injured because of I'll just say the incompetence and neglect of our U.S. military. They knew the dangers and the risk, and yet they chose to want to continue to operate the facility. So from 2014, it was basically between the regulators and the military under the administrative order and consent signed in 2015. The purpose was to keep the Red Hill facility operational, perhaps for another 30 years, making it maybe nearly 100 years old. They still wanted to use it. And that was a disturbing part of it. And it's been a fight all the way through. I think Marty and I, we have battle scars, having gone to the legislature and taken some abuse there.
We also had some good laughs too. We had a good time. There were so many fun, gotcha moments, right? So anyway,
yeah.
Battle Stars and good laughs. So I think for me, the thing that got me between the 2013-14 league and the 2021 league, in 2014, when the Navy was hauled before many state legislative hearing and held at point and tried to be held accountable, many times they would say things like, "Don't worry, our people drink this water too. We would never let them get poisoned." And I guess the part that really still sits heavy on my heart is that I believed them. Like I was naive enough 11 years ago to be like, oh yeah, it's really not in the military's interest to poison their own people. So, we all drink the same water, so I'm sure we'll be fine. The truth couldn't be more wrong, right? Like the reality is that they are willing to sacrifice their own people for this irrational, profit-driven focus on being war ready at any time. And there's a consequence living in a society that prioritizes war over everything else, war and profit over everything else. I want to tell a story. One of the other aspects that really made this fight so difficult was that both the State Department of Health, who is our local water enforcer, and the federal EPA did a really good job of running interference on behalf of the military. They would feign compliance, right? It was like enforcement theater. You guys heard of security theater when we go through airport security, right? Doesn't do anything. Similarly, the enforcement that the EPA is able to offer isn't actually enforcement. It's just, it's complicity with, dressed up as some sort of compliance. And the story that I wanted to share was that at one point during the fight, when we were really like, this is the Department of Health staff had published a report to the legislature that said that the Red Hill facility was inherently dangerous. But with that, the Department of Health was unwilling to take a position that the facility needed to be relocated. At that point in the struggle, we were forced to acknowledge that the military somehow had a right to store fuel on Oahu. And so we were talking about relocating it or double lining the existing facility, right? And basically it was a distraction for us to talk about these things because it was never, ever a practical option on the table. It was, we're going to suffer through Red Hill facility living there. And the director for the State Department of Health at the time, Keith Kawaoka, made a point of saying to me and to all of the Sierra Club, advocates and, Ernie and everyone that was coming out trying to defend our water, that we can't, put his finger up. He's like, there's the importance of the environment and our water, and then there's national security. And you can't have a protected environment unless you have national security. So you have to be willing to sacrifice one so that we can have the other. And my head just exploded. Like, that is the absolute wrong way to think about this. Genuine security means that we can drink our water. It means we can breathe our air, right? The US military has done more self-owns than any other failed sports team or whatever. Like, we don't need military enemies. We've got the US military to contaminate our own water and to, pollute our land and they have done more to harm Hawaii than I would say other outside countries in trying to be threatful to Hawaii. In reality, the real threat has been the US military occupation.
I would, I remember Keith Kawaoka, the deputy director of health at the time, one of the deputy directors. I think the other factor that was made it very challenging was that the Department of Defense is a major factor in our state's economy. It brings a lot of money to Hawaii. And because of that, I think it looked like a tendency to try to be very protective of them. But what we really needed was to really hold them accountable. They have more money than any other federal agency, more money than God. I don't know if that's true, but I don't know if God needs money, but I mean, they could have taken care of the environmental issues and done more to protect the environment. The Red Hill facility, when it was built in 1943, was completed in 1943. Within a few years, it started to leak and contaminate the environment. And yeah, they can say, well, the levels in the groundwater that's dissolved fuel in the groundwater, that's going down because they've removed all that fuel out of the facility, 104 million gallons, taking away the larger threat. But the legacy of it's still there. 80 years of who knows how much leakage that has soaked up in the lava rock between the bottom of the tanks, which are about 100 feet above the top of the water table of the aquifer, and the aquifer itself. Who knows how much is there? What kind of contaminants is still there? And every time it rains hard in Mauna Loa, in Kapukaki, will it now transport more contaminants into the groundwater and be a continual source, even if the Red Hill facility is completely empty, be a continual source of contamination to our water resources in that area. And folks, we're going to be dealing with Red Hill for decades, maybe even longer, definitely beyond my lifetime. And
Yeah,
we
this is a
cannot
100-year
let up.
project.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't let up. Yeah. The other thing I would like to note, in lessons learned, is just how much effort the military put into covering up information, right? Like, it's one thing to just be completely negligent and not care at all and just, mess up our water and dump all this, PFAS all over our ground. And then it's quite another to then turn around and make it difficult for the rest of us to figure out what's going on. And, there are multiple whistleblowers involved with Red Hill from even before the 2013 leak, when people were like, this is really a problem. You can't have this facility here. And the Navy was like, no, we'd rather have the convenience of gravity-fed, gasoline flowing into our ships at Pearl Harbor than to protect the drinking water of the people of Oahu. And so like they, the risk assessment, for example, that Wayne mentioned in his summary in the beginning, like that's something that we had been pushing for a long time. The Navy contracted, was it Tetra Tech or AECOM? I can't remember. Contracted with a private company. That private company said, yeah, it's really, really, really risky. Like it's so dangerous. And, you can do all of these little things to try to like minimize the risk, but the risk is going to be huge. And the Navy just disavowed that report and said, no, we don't agree with this risk assessment, right? Please don't read this. Don't follow it. And at the same time, do nothing to actually prepare us for this, right? So they say it's absolutely imperative for U.S. national security for this fuel to be stored above 100 feet above your drinking water. But we're not going to do anything to help you, no lifeboats of any kind, in the event your water gets contaminated. And then it was their people who suffered, and those people had nothing. For when the contamination first started happening, it was local people who brought water to the residents to help them, right? And it took days for the military to get their act together and relocate people and set up water buffaloes and things like that. Like they were completely unprepared, even though they totally knew how extreme this risk was. And that, I think, is the most telling of all things. It's not just negligence. They really, they couldn't care less about us.
They had what they call groundwater protection plans, but really they were plans designed to how to protect their Red Hill shaft water source, which is connected to the same fuel facility at Red Hill, how to protect it from contamination from Red Hill. And that was their plan. And that plan was in place from 07, 08, 2007, 2008. So they knew it was coming. They knew the vulnerability of contamination of their drinking water for the base. And yet, unfortunately, it happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think of all the warning signs that the Navy had, that regulators had, that we had, well before 2021. And you did mention that leak. I think it started in December 2013. But there were all these alarm bells going off that the operators of the facility ignored for a month, and then they reported a 27,000 gallon spill in 2014. I'm curious, like, what was the community's reaction when news of that spill broke? Can you recall, like, how did I guess we know how, yeah, for folks that are around, maybe Ernie and Marty and Kainoa too, if you remember that response.
I can share from my perspective, which is limited. That at that time, I didn't see a lot of community concern coming up, and I could be wrong, but I saw that what was happening was the Navy and I think the regulators they basically were putting on kind of a show to say that everything is under control. It's not an emergency. Don't worry, we've got it under control. It's going to be taken care of. So that people are kind of buying that. And I think the elected officials at the time, they kind of bought into that. But I said this is a disaster waiting to happen, and it was I think over the years through the neighborhood boards, greater awareness, and various neighborhood boards passing resolutions in against the Red Hill facility. I think that was some of the community activities that I saw. Marty?
I think one key thing that we did have, one asset the community had in the early days of the fight against Red Hill was that our local newspaper, the Star Advertiser, Honolulu Star Advertiser, was actually very supportive of shutting down Red Hill. They were very concerned about that, the editorial board. And so we got, regular coverage of the Red Hill issue, especially right around when the leak first became public. And so there were like front page stories on a regular basis, and then there were op-eds, throughout the whole struggle. And so I think that was a key asset that helped to really educate people. I think when the announcement was first made, people were shocked. And at least amongst my own family and the circle of people that I associate with, my echo chamber, we all thought, oh, well, I mean, it's absolutely crazy to have 100 million gallons worth of fuel stored 100 feet above our primary aquifer. Of course they're going to move it, right? Like we're not going to continue this, right? And I think it took us a year, 2 years to really come to terms with like, holy moly, they really are intent about keeping this place here till 2045. It was outrageous. I mean, the 2015 AOC that we signed was designed to ramp down the Red Hill facility by 2038. And the Navy did not like that. They wanted to stay until 2045. And so they kept introducing small little changes, dragging their feet, right? Like all these internal deadlines for reports. And so they would just be late filing that report, and it pushed all the other deadlines down, right? And then like a slow creep towards that 2045 goal, right? Because that's for them when they are going to make their transition to, fossil fuel free war making. And so they weren't going to shut down that facility, no matter how much of a risk it posed to our water supply. And I think it took us a little while to get there and to realize that the Navy really wasn't on our side on this. And then after that, we started to see more activism. And so there were bills introduced in our local legislature to try to better protect our water, to, provide some sort of accountability for the Navy. The young woman who was in charge of the Red Hill facility at the time that the 2013, 2014 leak happened, she was reassigned and never heard from again. New people were brought in, and they kept telling us, oh, it's an engineering marvel, and this the convenience of getting gasoline, gravity fed without electricity. This is, more important than the safety of your water. And I think then people started to really like ramp up. And like Uncle Ernie said, it was, neighborhood boards, talking to friends and family, Rotary Club, Lions Club, like any of these, how many high school conversations I had with kids, at classrooms and things like that, helping people to understand what this threat was. And it took a lot. I think people were like, this just doesn't make sense. Why would you do it like this? And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. They don't care about us. That's what it is.
Yeah, mahalo for sharing that too, Marty. And I'll chime in too. I came a little later in the game, maybe around like 2021 or 2020. shortly before the second spill happened too. At the time, I was actually chair of the Honolulu Youth Commission when we prepped a resolution out of requests from not only some youth, but also Auntie Mahilani Cipher, who formerly worked at the Board of Water Supply as well, who told us this is an issue that your generation should be concerned about. So there is a lot of long-term knowledge about from people in our communities about the threat that this has posed and things that they've done. So when we've heard about it, prepped the resolution a month, little did we know, a month before the spill, and it takes a few months to get a resolution, actually to vote, as people know here. But it also shows that, when it comes to like the next generation, like for us, when we think about threats to our water, threats to resources that we need to survive, how fast and expeditious the decision making on our end can occur, yet it's still not reflected in the government processes as well as the agencies. And I really want to highlight, I think that was like a huge, I feel like there's like a lot of distrust with government. Of course, that was kind of expressed over time and has slowly built up into the world that we live in as well now. But it's very concerning when, when community outreach and all of these things are really utilized to sort of shroud in duplicity. And one thing I will say too, because part of that organizing that blossomed from those youth efforts and really all of the efforts of the people in this room was also the formulation of the Community Representation Initiative. The first time in history, the Pentagon was required to meet directly with communities that it impacted. So that was a huge success in itself, but it also demonstrated too, right? Like, oh, we're open, we're transparent, we're willing to find the solutions. But as soon as you start asking a hard question, due to ongoing litigation, we cannot answer that question. It was like the idea that now accounting is demonstrated as the big metrics versus accountability. It really highlights the difference of our cultures. Where for us, if you're really honest about it, if you're really open to it, then yeah, share all the information. We need people to be accountable and we need to change the behaviors for the sake of our children. But that's clearly not, as Marty was also sharing, a part of the equation. And that's something that I would implore everybody to really work towards this shift. But yeah, mahalo.
I just want to add, thanks for reminding me, Kainoa, but the other asset that we had after the 2014 leak was the city council, right? My own council member, Kara Fukunaga, who's now a senator, she helped to lead the council taking a firm position against the military storing their fuel above our aquifer, and we could count on the city council for resolutions and for holding informational hearings and coming out to events and things like that. I think that really helped. It really was very much starting from the very grassroots of like your neighbors, right? And like making sure everybody in your classroom or in your workplace knew about what was going on. And we had petition signatures. At that stage the campaign was to fix it up or shut it down. We were estimating how much money it would be to fix the Red Hill facility, double line it so that it was as secure and up to date as a corner gas station, right, which has like double lined tanks for fuel, right? And so they're like, oh, but it's going to be billions of dollars. I'm like, really? How much does it cost to live without water? It's kind of expensive to import water to Hawaii. Maybe we should be investing that. But no, I cannot believe that was the debate. How much does it cost to save our water? I don't know if it's worth it. It's outrageous. Just, pointing to the differences between our cultures, right? Like the US military is just sort of like, saving you is worth it. Even though in theory, their mission is to defend us. They've done the exact opposite how many times already?
Yeah, and I can't imagine that amount of effort would have taken just to keep people, wake people up as to what we were, dealing with, facing. But really, that was, when I came in, and then when the November 21 leak happened, like that, that upswell, that outpouring of advocacy and engagement and organizing, I think that's all rooted in the foundation that was built since 2014 on a community level. But speaking of, a culture of accountability versus accounting or lack thereof, we'll roll back time a little bit to, after the 2014 report of the leak, there's this administrative order and consent that was entered into with the Navy Department of Health and EPA. And Ernie, I know you kind of alluded to how it really seemed designed to just enable the Navy to continue operating this facility. And so I was wondering maybe if you and Ernie, you and Marty can tell us a little bit more about this document. Like, what was it promising to do? And did you have any hopes or concerns or disagreement about, whether it would be adequate to protect our water supply?
Yeah, thanks, Wayne. As word of this came about that they were negotiating something called an administrative order and consent, a voluntary order that would be signed by the Department of Health, US EPA, the Navy, and the Defense Logistics Agency. We were actually invited by the Department of Health to sign on. And I probably didn't tell the
detail. Oh my
story.
goodness.
Yeah. So Marty, they actually invited us to sign, and I said, I'm not going to sign this because along with it was you needed to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I said, as a public official, and the community has a right to know about this important issue, I am not going to sign a damn NDA, non-disclosure NDA. And I refused to sign the AOC. They did announce that we would be subject matter experts, and they would have to go through the motions of inviting us to different meetings. Not all the meetings, but certain selected meetings that they wanted us to be there, which we attended and provided over 100 separate letters, comment letters over the years on the AOC. But one thing, when the AOC was being discussed back in 2015, the department, they didn't want to really advertise and let people know, let the community know that this agreement was being considered. They were trying to do the basic minimum. So what I did, and it got me into a lot of trouble, I sent a letter to 170,000 customers of the Board of Water Supply across the island, informing them about this administrative order and consent and encouraging them to become knowledgeable and to provide comments. I remember hearings being held at the cafeteria at Honolulu Middle School, and the room was packed with people. And I don't think the regulators and the Navy knew what to expect. So we did that the first time. Later on, we actually did that again with the letter out to all of our customers. I think one of the strategies that we had was to inform people, to equip people with knowledge, because informed people are powerful. When they have that knowledge and they know what's happening, they can exercise their rights to be able to voice their concerns. So that's always been kind of the approach that we've tried to take through the years, to speak to whoever would listen to us about this AOC. I did not like this AOC because it was designed to have the Navy repair corrosion, make sure they have their operations in order, check leak detection systems upgraded, but it was basically designed to keep the facility operational. And they were to look at different tank upgrade alternatives. And of course, when the alternatives came out, on one end you had double wall the tanks, basically a tank within a tank, which is the same as a corner gas station, to just basically clean, inspect, and repair what they currently are doing at the time. They decided to actually select that option, the cheapest and easiest option, but not the most protective of our environment and our water resources. So this AOC, I remember getting a call by the governor, who was very proud to let me know that they signed the AOC. And I actually told him, no, I oppose the AOC. It wasn't a good, it wasn't a happy moment for me. It was actually a very sad moment. But that's kind of the idea of the AOC. There are pertinent parts of the AOC that I think are still required or in effect for today, related to groundwater protection and evaluation, risk, and also the investigation and remediation of risks, the groundwater models, fate and contaminant transport. The 2015 AOC is still in effect. Not all of it, but the parts that are in effect are important. But these parts are not being acknowledged too strongly right now by the EPA and Department of Health. But they have to realize that the 2015 AOC, the portions that don't relate to continuing the tank operation, they're still in effect and they should be carried out. So the groundwater models were started to be worked on from 2015, 2016, and there's still no approved groundwater flow model yet. And we are, we're 9-10 years through this experience.
And so Uncle Ernie, what does it mean that we don't know what the groundwater flow is?
So so really the underground geology of that area, and it's typical of our Hawaiian Islands. It's really complicated. It's really complex, layer upon layer of lava flows, lava tubes, fractures, and how groundwater moves is really, it's kind of a guessing game. So the Navy, what we've advocated is to really try to do the field investigation, put in the monitor wells necessary to characterize the nature and extent of the contamination and to better understand the underground aquifers, aquifer structure. I think it's still not at the point where we can feel confident enough to turn on Halava shaft, Halava wells, and IA wells, and not creating unintended consequences for future generations that might have to deal with contamination spreading even further to the west and affecting more wells. So that's some
spreading
of the
to the east. It could also spread to the east and affect Waikiki and downtown Honolulu and all of that.
Well, we are in Mauna Loa Valley. We're right now installing groundwater monitor wells by the Board of Water Supply in Mauna Loa Valley and also in Halava Valley and Aiea. We'll continue to work with the Navy to put in more wells because it equips us, I think, with more information than where we're at. But we're not at the place where I feel comfortable that the nature and extent of the contamination, how it's spreading, is well defined. The other thing too that this AOC is pointed out, it looked also at petroleum contaminants, but it looked at other substances that might emanate from the Red Hill facility and move in the environment, not just petroleum. So when I looked at that just recently, I think that actually might include the PFAS contamination, which is becoming much more of an issue at Red Hill right now. And I think that PFAS that they're discovering right now probably originated from that facility. And I think it should be part of the issues that the Navy addresses to remediate.
Uncle Ernie, you weren't alone in your opposition to the first AOC. 17 senators at the time, out of the 25 senators representing districts in Hawaii, opposed the signing of the AOC. Their particular concern was that it abrogated the Department of Health's responsibility around deciding what happened to the fate of our water to the EPA. So the way the laws are set up, regardless of Red Hill, the Department of Health is supposed to be the entity that makes decisions around water in the context of like the quality of the water, right? They enforce the Safe Drinking Water Act. They enforce the Underground Storage Tank Act, which is the one that regulates Red Hill. And the way the AOC was written, it made it sound or feel, and they acted as if the Department of Health was up there as a decision maker, but really they were window dressing, and it was the EPA and the Navy behind closed doors making decisions in the context of this AOC. And so there were a lot, we had all kinds of like sign-on letters and petitions and elected officials from the city council to, the legislature opposed to this AOC and went forward with it anyway, unfortunately. And here's where we're at.
It is where we're at.
Yeah, people have, lifelong, children are going to have, their lives have been ruined, right? Their lifelong, diseases, the long list of health problems that military dependents and service people now have to live with because they happen to be living on the Navy waterline is just, it's outrageous. It's thousands and thousands of people, and it's not, and civilians too. I mean, I make the point of highlighting military families and independents because of the comments that were made at the time by the military that we wouldn't harm our own people. But I think it's really important to note also that it's not just military people, right? There were all kinds of people, daycare centers, businesses, homes that used to be military homes that are now leased out by private companies. And these people they didn't get the same kind of like relocation services and health clinics and things like that the military families got. So yeah, it's the harm was so severe, and all because we were just too complacent. We took the military for their word. That was our first mistake. And then we overemphasized the importance of retraining and, filing reports and studying about it harder, and not actually taking actions that protected our health.
Yeah. Yeah, it's heartbreaking too. And you mentioned the impacted families and how, they've really been gaslit. The health effects in court have been like downplayed by Department of Justice and their attorneys. And so it definitely seems like even though the Navy admitted negligence, being ready to heal the harms that they've inflicted still seems, even financially, still seems a distant proposition. Ernie, you mentioned the need for groundwater monitoring and I imagine that's not cheap, right? It's a burden that's gonna be borne by, is that burden going to be borne by the Board of Water Supply and its customers, or is the Navy or federal government providing any compensation or anything of that sort for your efforts?
Our efforts right now is coming from the Board of Water Supply. And I do want to acknowledge the state legislature. We've gotten over a few sessions now, probably a total of $12 million from them to help install groundwater monitor wells and drill exploratory wells to replace the wells that are shut down. So I appreciate that effort, but the bulk of the cost is coming from the Board of Water Supply ratepayers. We are pursuing cost recovery through a Federal Tort Claims Act claim, which we filed, and also unfortunately because we were turned down by the Navy, we actually the board, our water board, decided to file the lawsuit in federal court, and we're going through that process right now. It's a claim for about $1.2 billion. It will be challenging, but we're committed to go to battle for this. I think the other part, Wayne, and I know there are many other lawsuits. One of the things we told the Navy back in 2014, when we learned of that leak, that you're correct, it started in 2013 and it went into January 2014, was to just basically come clean. Just tell us everything about this facility. Then we can work with them and see how we can do the best we can under the circumstances. But that begins with a complete, full picture of what's happened at Red Hill. What has leaked out of the facility over its past 80 years, different types of fuel from bunker oil to gasoline, motor gasoline, aviation gas, jet fuel, diesel, and other substances that they may have used there that may contain things like forever chemicals. Just come clean. Unfortunately, that was never actually taken to heart. And we kind of see right now it unfolding in different cases and different situations. And mahalo to the whistleblowers for putting pressure on the Navy coming clean and telling the story, telling the complete story. But we don't know what we don't know at this point about this facility. But I encourage the military, come clean, stop hiding, just tell us the truth.
Wayne, can I weigh in on just the lack of transparency issues? Because, in some ways, Red Hill is really not an isolated incident, right? I think the question I get often as somebody that is not from Hawaii, but has Hawaii ties now through family, but mainly interested in international solidarity and thinking about this as a human rights issue, the question I get often is like, why should people outside of Hawaii care about Red Hill, right? Why is this something that matters beyond Hawaii? And I think the importance of Red Hill is that it's not an isolated incident, right? It's part of a systemic issue that happens time and time and time again, just like same story, different chapter. So this chapter of like military transparency or lack thereof, accountability or lack thereof, how they choose to remediate or not, right? How they choose to engage with the community or not and haven't, is part of what has happened historically, not just with relation to water, but over time and time again with relation to contamination by other kind of hazardous substances, right? We're thinking about like uranium mining on Navajo Nation, thinking about the kind of contamination that's happened. I mean, so many Superfund sites are former military sites that are no longer active, right, around the world. We think about the destruction of Kaho'olawe and so many other places that have been impacted by live bombing that still contain unexploded ordnance that have had all kinds of issues that have seeped into the groundwater. I mean, Ernie was talking about the really unique kind of characteristics of a volcanic aquifer system, right? And like not knowing how the plume is moving, not really being able to pinpoint that with precision. And then thinking about the cost of monitoring is now falling upon the Board of Water Supply as the public utility, because you have good, kind-hearted people that are water protectors that are saying, no, we have to, for our keiki, right, our children, for the future generations, we have to understand what is actually happening right now, because there's no data that's being shared, right? There's no active effort. And what I see time and time again also happening with in tribal communities and tribal nations across the United States is similar things, where you have the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers as an agency, right, a federal agency that's supposed to be able to determine and help in permitting issues and conduct environmental impact statements and understand exactly like what are the effects of infrastructure projects, of different kinds of development, of pipelines, of underground storage containers, tanks. And what we're seeing is that actually who's bearing the cost are the frontline communities, right? So for example, in the case of Standing Rock, similar to what Ernie was talking about with the difficulties monitoring, the lack of transparency, the lack of accountability, and the lack of an emergency response plan that's active, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe has never received an unredacted copy of an emergency management response plan for the Dakota Access Pipeline, which was permitted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And that permit was found invalid and invalidated in 2020. Right. So we see that even when permitting processes occur, there is still a lack of transparency and a lack of accountability. And what often has to happen, unfortunately, are these long drawn out, decades long litigation processes where through discovery, we have to force their hand to ultimately show us what are the documents that are, there that they have in their possession that show the information that the public should know now. So just last year in the Dakota Access Pipeline case, which again, over 100,000 people went to Standing Rock between 2016 and 2017 to stand in solidarity there to protect the water, right? And I think that was a galvanizing moment. But what people were seeing is we're there to protect the water because this pipeline could leak at any point in time. A document that we were able to uncover just this past year showed that they had in their possession, the pipeline company and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers knew this, that there was 700 frack out events where 1.4 million gallons of drilling fluid that was potentially toxic reached the waters of Lake Oʻahu, right, the Missouri River watershed system. And so we're talking about at the time that people were protesting and were there in 2017, this was happening during the construction. and we're finding about it 9 years later, right? And so here we're talking today about this, 10-year anniversary of the administrative order on consent, and thinking about what are the lessons learned and where are we today, right? And then from 2015, as Wayne, you kind of narrated and set the stage, right, of all of the things that have happened since 2015, and since that, and since all of the different leaks that have happened. And it kind of comes back to this idea of why is it that the frontline communities are always the ones that are bearing the cost, right? Why is it that the taxpayers are the ones, right, the users for the Board of Water Supply? Why is it that those are the people that are bearing the cost, right? Not just on the state level, but there needs to be also a federal response and an understanding from the U.S. military that when they say we are good stewards, right, in environmental impact statements regarding the upcoming military leases that are set to expire, that people don't believe them anymore because they've cried wolf too many times, right? They've said this too many times. And what they're showing is time and time again, the lack of transparency, the lack of information sharing. And then it comes back to that question of what do we prioritize? And it becomes a false decision, right? National security or economy is sort of elevated above the environment, and you have to choose. But what we're not seeing and we have to understand is that environment, right? And we're talking about water is like so essential to our ability to sustain life. So as you're talking, I'm sort of getting these PTSD moments of like all of the difficulty of constantly trying to hold the military accountable, constantly, asking for documentation. Even in the Energy Transfer versus Greenpeace case, it just resulted in a $669 million judgment against Greenpeace. In that case, we know that there's over 500,000 documents of pipeline safety documents that have never seen the light of day and have never reached the public, right? But that certainly some of the agencies have and haven't been able to share. So I think there's like a broad landscape here, right? In addition to the military, we also have those federal agencies like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that, plays a role, in the different agencies here that also play a role. In this case, the EPA, right? Which we have been in different, and I've had the opportunity to be with you all in different town halls that the EPA and Army have held together. And it seems like time and time again, too, the EPA sort of shields the Army from some kind of, public outreach, and is kind of there to be a conciliatory voice, but not another voice calling for that accountability, which needs to happen.
I mean, just to underscore what Natalie just said, I mean, the military has contaminated water from similar underground storage tanks in multiple places, Albuquerque, Camp Lejeune, like there's a long list of, similarly situated communities that have been exposed chronic contamination and had no idea. And just to prove that the U.S. military has not learned its lesson, they just broke ground a few days ago on a new fuel storage facility in Papua New Guinea. And they're just spreading that danger and that threat farther and farther across the Pacific, and are not changing their behavior at all, not doing anything to make sure that they don't cause more harm than good as they have in the past. It's extremely disappointing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the lessons that we really that many folks have realized is that this is not an isolated incident, right? The fact that there's so many other places that have gone through faced the same threats, same challenges. And yeah, I know you've been doing a lot of work on Turtle Island and connecting to other places. Like, would you like to share about maybe some other places where you've seen similar struggles and how the communities there have responded to or worked to fight to protect their resources and their lands and waters?
Well, that's a loaded question, going to a lot of different things. I think one thing that I will say is really common and prevalent to because I can go into each of the individual issues and kind of like rabbit hole down each one. But but is really the call to shift behaviors and outcomes. Because regardless, and really also looking at changing conditions. But when it comes to this idea again, like visiting this culture of accountability versus or accounting versus accountability, this idea of really again kind of shifting metrics, right, into how we're measuring and what we deem successful. Somehow national security needs to put water as part of the equation because it's clearly demonstrated that it's not. And I don't think they're cognizant too of the of what's going to happen when things boil over, because we're witnessing across the planet a strain on resources. Yes, some places are getting wetter, but a lot of places are getting drier, even Hawaii included. And when we think about the limit, when we think about how what happens when there's limited resources, things will boil over, and do we want to be in a position where, I guess reframing that is, do we want to be in a position of abundance, or do we want to be in a position of scarcity? I think that's really what a lot of this behavioral cause is calling for, because in all truth, as much as humans have damaged the planet, and not all humans, quite to be clear, but we've also there are lessons from different cultures, from different communities, about the abundance that we can bring to even the driest of places. To as much as we've changed regions to be uninhabitable, there's other places where we've turned oases in the desert, which I've truly found beauty in, and learning from our brothers and sisters in Turtle Island. So there's a real opportunity for us to really look at the things that have worked, and as Ernie has shared too, disseminate that information to really call for those changes. The other thing that I will say too, that I've really enjoyed too, is the evolution of even the legal field of recognizing rights of nature, which is not perfect, but definitely something that we can really transform, to really look at the conditions of how do we shift from an ROI, from a return on investment, to a return on integrity, and all of these things, and how do we shape law processes to comply with that? Because what at least my experience is with a lot of these different things is really the strong effort, as they say, the wicked don't rest. And it takes a lot of effort in order to deny people justice. But in borrowing from some inspiration, even from within Western contexts, I was just sharing today too, because we're here with the New York Climate Week, and one of the things we're pushing for is also peace during this contentious time. But really borrowing from a saying from John F. Kennedy during his famous peace speech, the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war. So when we really think about that, what does it mean when we support resources rather than harming people, to meeting their basic needs? And I think that's been one of the other things. And one last thing I will say too is something an elder from Samoa shared with me. And it was, there's a difference between curing and healing. Curing is leaving no evidence that there was a sickness or something wrong in the first place. But healing is to make whole again. So, as we continue to evolve these ideas and these processes, we need to recognize that what we need is healing. So how do we make things whole again? And how do we create those systems that can enforce that? So maybe instead of a Department of War now, since we're being honest about how things really are occurring, maybe it's time we really look at what it means to have a peace force rather than a war force. So mahalo.
Wayne, I just say the future is bright with leaders like Kainoa and yourself out there, with the concept of aina momona. Instead of scarcity, how do we shift the paradigm of our thinking and do like what Kainoa suggests? How do we make peace instead of this constant war that Marty and I have been fighting for? I don't know the answer, Marty, but we've been fighting this battle for 11 years now, and no end in sight.
I will say, regardless of how this particular battle has turned out, the contractors have made bank regardless, right? Like that's one thing that it's like really sits with me uncomfortably, right? Is that, they did not help in terms of trying to make the case for closing Red Hill before it actually harmed anybody. And then and I think part of it is because they realize that regardless of whether the decision is made to keep it in place and try to upgrade it or maintain it poorly, or to remove it, take it out, they made money either way. And so, and that's kind of the sick reality of the way the U.S. system works, is that here's all this pursuit of a war in the name of greed, right? It's all about exploitation, and it takes a lot to deny people their rights. There's a lot of control that needs to be exerted, right? And the profiteers make money regardless of what happens. So I think it's important for us to be honest about the reality that it's the pursuit of war in the name of profit that has risked the water supply for the island of Oahu, and honestly a lot of the land and beauty in the Hawaiian Islands, as well as across Oceania and across the world. The U.S. military is a plague on the planet.
Yep, I don't disagree with you, Marty. And I think the bank is around $2 billion on Red Hill and counting.
Yeah. Can I just add, Wayne, what Kainoa was saying about how there's a question here that I think underlies Red Hill, right? Like this, I think this conversation here is sort of like a look into the past, but it's also like a look into the future of, what we envision and what we want to see and what we don't want to see anymore. And I think that's the question also about why care, and what we outside of Hawaii, even if you don't have Hawaii ties, right? Like why we should care about the things that are happening in different places. And I think right now, as we see sort of the breakdown of environmental rollbacks happening, federal protections, the rollback of all kinds of environmental laws that were, the rail guards are coming down, right? And we see the international system and international mechanisms, and it's slowly being eroded and withered away. I've been reflecting a lot on what do we do in this moment, right? Where we are seeing not just at the local level, but at the national and international level, so many challenges. And I think one of the things I keep coming back to is the need for increased solidarity across borders, and also understanding that we, it used to say start local, go global, right? And I think we have to also think about now the other way, right? If we're not part of Hawaii and we are not Hawaiian, right, or not local, and how can we support, right? And I know that that's a question that I think we received today, is like, how can we support? And I think part of it is keeping the conversation going and keeping it alive, and educating others, I think, is a huge role that we play when we're not, because and I think Kainoa, you said this, or it was in your initial biography, right? A little bit about you, but thinking about Hawaii not just as an island, or the earth is an island too, right? And what we are seeing, the failures in Hawaii, should concern everybody, because they're setting a standard now, right now, set the standard back in 2015, but they're setting a new standard now, right, on how the government and how the military treats the water and communities everywhere, right? So I think that's a really important perspective, is to keep in mind that Hawaii is one chapter in a much larger struggle, and Red Hill is part of a global pattern. And I think that what we are seeing is that need to bring people together and have a really solid understanding of what's at stake. A few days ago, I was probably like one of those days where, just a difficult day all around, but when and the news cycle was perpetually even darker, right? Making it even bleaker. But I saw something that brought me a lot of hope, and that was in Quimsacocha in Azuay, Ecuador. Cuenca is the second largest city there, and one of the things that has been happening over the past many years is the fight of the local communities there in the highlands, struggling to protect their water resources from mining. And the movement has grown to the point where just last week, they formed a human river because the number of people that came out, an outpouring of support, into the streets, just flowed through the streets. And there are aerial photos where literally it's just a human river, right, marching to protect the water. And what I find so powerful about that, and I have also found so powerful about the local organizing in Hawaii on Red Hill and around Red Hill, is the mobilization of community at every level, right? The fact that Ernie Lau and the Board of Water Supply as a public utility has really taken it upon themselves to, be carry that banner. And then also you have water protectors, right? And you see it, and it's an intergenerational, multi-generational fight. And I think that struggle is part of what we look to, right, as a really beautiful example and powerful example of what can happen when people come together with a joint purpose in mind. And I think that's something that we have to continue to do, right, and continue to keep in mind, because challenges are never ending, and that's something we know. And even with this 2023, consent order and consent decree, sorry, we know it's an uphill battle. And as Ernie was saying, there's going to be more litigation, and it's a long fight. So if there's 11 years running up until now, we have another many years in this fight. So it is really it's a long haul. And I think that's something that we have to understand too, and brace ourselves for it and pace ourselves for it, but understand the importance of solidarity in that, because it's what keeps us motivated on those days when, those days.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I 100% agree. Everything you said. That we're dealing with a bully, basically, right? The U.S. military just pushes itself around and says, this is what we're going to do, naming it national security, you can't question us, right? And the only way to really counteract a bully is for all the rest of us who are getting bullied to band together, right? And push back, right? We got to hug it out of them, And it's only when we really have that huge cross, community global movements towards, helping to rein the U.S. military in, that we'll be able to counteract the most powerful military in the world. So yeah, solidarity is where it's at. I think, sign up with Sierra Club. If you are watching this and you're, learning about this for the first time, the Sierra Club has a huge resource, website, and you can sign up for updates there. The Board of Water Supply maintains, I think, the canonical repository of all the documents, so many letters. You are doing this wrong. Again, you're doing this wrong. Please see my previous letter. This is awful. But if you want to read all of those, they're at the Board of Water Supply website. And the Red Hill families, they want to see a congressional hearing on Red Hill. There was 2 indictments of 2 low-level civilians, and they're concerned that that's the extent of the justice that's going to be served in Red Hill, and they want a congressional hearing. And so, when that call to call congressional members goes out, the Sierra Club will share it, and there are mutual aid groups, Red Hill mutual aid groups that you can sign up with and follow online. And then we'll need everybody from every district to call all of their elected officials to make the case for why we need to have a congressional hearing on Red Hill. And it's going to be, at some point we're going to have to really pinch the Navy to be able to pay for the cleanup of our water. That's where the bottom line is we've got to clean this water up, and they have to help.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, and I think one thing that struck me, is, when Natali was speaking, was the fact that it was, the people of their place, right? The indigenous communities in Quechua and across the North American continent that are really leading the charge. And you mentioned earlier too that maybe it shouldn't be that way, right? Folks are protecting all of us, so we all kind of have a reciprocal responsibility to not be bystanders and passive beneficiaries. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I did want to, speaking of the military, and maybe it's a little bit of a shift, but maybe not. in Hawaii now, we're currently discussing, as has been mentioned, the expiration of leases that have been issued to the Department of Defense, Department of War, of lands that were basically stolen. I mean, they were stolen from the Hawaiian Kingdom. These are Hawaiian Kingdom government and crown lands, and then ceded or given over by the insurrectionists to the United States government upon the purported annexation of Hawaii. Anyway, these leases of stolen lands are set to expire in 2029. Maybe Marty or Kainoa, if you can tell us a little bit about what these leases are and what the concerns, just some of the concerns that have been voiced about the continued use of stolen and sacred lands for live fire training and other military purposes.
Yeah, so these leases were for 65 years, which is the longest lease the state law allows. It is for lease of lands that the state is responsible for managing, as they are former Hawaiian Crown government lands. It's several thousand acres, sprinkled around different islands and different military installations. There are several. The most famous one probably is Makua Valley. Malama Makua engaged in a 20-year legal battle with the military to protect natural and cultural resources that are harmed by the live fire training there. They successfully stopped live fire training for 20 years, to the point that the Army announced that they would never do live fire training there again. There are several hundreds of acres of state land mixed in, mostly in the front part of that training range. So that's on the table. There's lands on Kauai, an area called Nohili, also known as the Pacific Missile Range Facility. And then there are lands on the Big Island. Perhaps the most controversial there is the Puakoloa training area on Mauna Kea, on the Saddle. And there the U.S. military does a wide range of live fire training, including depleted uranium. It's also, critical habitat for the mamane, which is, a native bird that is on the verge of extinction. So there's several lands. One thing I want to make clear is that the leases are not renewals, right? We're not talking about a renewal, right? When these leases were drafted, there was no anticipation that they would be extended anyway. 65 years was the full length that anybody can get for a state lease. So I think, the drafters at the time were like, this is it. We're going to do 65 years and then we're going to be done. The expectation was that the land would be returned to Hawaii in the condition that it was given. But it's also turning out that that seems to be impossible. There was litigation around the state leases for Puakoloa that found that the U.S. military, or that the state of Hawaii wasn't doing its bare minimum to hold the U.S. military to the obligations in the lease. They weren't inspecting the land and making sure that things were cleaned up after every exercise. And, site visits that were done as a part of the lawsuit revealed, extensive contamination of this land. Like it's really, really bad. And so the court came out with a decision that said that the state has an obligation, a duty to malama aina, which means in Hawaiian to care for the land. And that was really quite revolutionary for the courts to find that. I think it helps to set the stage for how we're going to consider the extent to which the state of Hawaii is going to continue to engage in a war-based economy and lease more lands, or engage in any kind of land deal with the U.S. military. Kainoa, I'm sure you've got so much more.
No, mahalo nui, Marty, for laying out all the legal work. So, one of the things that I want to kind of share too is like there's a historic amount of opposition now, I would say, against the military and all of the activities that it's a part of, and part of it kind of boiling down, connecting back to Red Hill in a sense of is these behaviors haven't changed but have worsened our conditions living here on the islands. And one thing that I would offer to for others from other places to consider too is Hawaii is one of the few places on the planet where if you really want to fix it, all you have to do is take care of it and for the most part leave it alone, as kind of COVID showed us, where we can see all the marine wildlife and everything return. And so if you can't fix Hawaii, if you can't fix the island, good luck fixing the planet, or healing the planet, I should say. So really, if you want to start somewhere, we should start somewhere like here. But when it comes to again these activities, and one of the things that's been really bugging me lately has been our own governor. I refuse to say R. I never voted for him. I'll be honest and transparent about that. But he his fear mongering on this idea that, well, you know, they'll just eminent domain the land and take it away, and we'd lose the ability to create some sort of deal in a sense where we at least get something out of it. Well, first off, there's no amount of money, there's no amount of things that they can pay on top of the lease that could justify the poisoning of our aquifer here on Oahu, the aquifer on Hawaii Island, what's happening on Kauai, what's happening on Maui, and all of these places, because we cannot live without water, food, and land. So that's just not part of the equation, at least. And I think a lot of people are expressing that, which is why there's a lot of efforts to sort of circumvent their own state processes, at the same time threaten federal processes. But again, kind of getting back to the root of it, it's all an illegal occupation. And for me, that's the other thing too. If you want to talk about shifting behaviors and holding people accountable, Hawaii still was and is the first ever modern in contemporary times, the first ever contemporary regime change. And it laid the blueprint for what it means to overthrow countries, and to occupy them or do whatever it is in order to hold control. So for me, if you want to talk about changing conditions, we need to go back to that. And I will say too, if you want to talk about the governor and his little fear mongering too, it's amazing that this guy can go around telling everybody about the success of Hawaiian law. At the same time, he's holding Hawaiian law in regards to environmental law. At the same time, he's complaining about the community not having a purity test, you know, conducting a purity test on holding the government accountable. Like, that's just not realistic. Are you kidding me? But you can run around and say, again, holding us to this purity test and opposing communities who are community organizations and are people who have held government accountable for so many things as some of the things that Marty shared. But all of those laws, all of those environmental protection laws are a result of litigation, and also going back into it, the laws that were really kapu, that were our own sacred practices and traditions that were turned into law when we were a kingdom 132 years ago. So you're riding on the back of, when you talk about Hawaii as the leader of environmental protection, of all of the things our ancestors put into place, as well as our government 132 years ago, and we haven't done any better since. So for perspective, in that, if you really want progress, we really need to look at and return to reestablishing that legal authority and that lawful nation. And I know that's something that even us here in Hawaii have a lot to talk about. But for me, that's one of the futures that I see personally. When your ancestors set the standard for what it means to live in harmony with people and place, then it's our job to break that ceiling. And it's time to return to that too. So mahala. And that's going to require, and I would say again, as Marty was expressing, as well as Natali, to, you know, if people are reflecting that the current political situation that we're in now in the federal government is a reflection of, you know, I won't say who, but a 1930s period in Europe. You know, it really did take a lot of the world to hold those particular people accountable. So it's going to take the world to hold these ones accountable. It's time to stop pretending about who is the bad person and the bully on the block. And it's time to hold them accountable because it's impacting all of us, whether it's here in the islands or the globe. So mahalo.
Yeah. Just to build on that a little bit, you know, the Governor Green went on the local radio station here a few days ago and, you know, basically trying to convince us that signing up some sort of new land deal is in our best interest. And, you know, I at least have to give him credit for trying to be a little transparent about it. He said, we have to be sober about our situation, that the US military is going to take this land regardless of what we do. And so we might as well try to negotiate with them and get some money out of the deal. And I think that's an important thing for us to sit with. What does it mean to have to be sober about our relationship with the US military? I think it means that, you know, we recognize that this is an abusive relationship. The US military is like, you know, a domestic abuser. And and Hawaii feels like we have to capitulate to the US to be able to protect ourselves in some other way, right? Because we feel like we can't get free of this abusive relationship. And I think the leases expiring provides an important opportunity for us as a people to really sit with each other and be like, we can leave. We can get free of the US. All empires end. The Hawaii will be free eventually. Why not sooner than later? Right? The US is really going through it right now. And it's not real clear how it's going to turn out. And a lot of what the US is now espousing, it doesn't actually jive with a lot of local residents in Hawaii, Hawaiian or not. And so I think it's, if we're going to be sober, let's be real sober about it and not just like give in and give up and do what has always been done because that's the easiest, because that's actually going to be what makes our life harder. And if we actually stand up now and push back now, we make it easier down the road for us to have a peaceful transition away from a military-based economy.
Can I just jump in real quick here too? Because I think one of the things that we're talking about here with these military leases, which by the way, for those that are outside of Hawaii, when we're talking about 65-year lease terms, it's $1 for the entire length of the term. And I was outraged when I thought it was $1 per year, but just to clarify, it's $1 for the entire term. But that aside, that's just a like small aside. I really think that one of the things when I heard the Governor Green's interview recently, and I think he's had a couple now. And he is using sort of this idea of eminent domain, right? And he keeps saying, well, they could always take it. And they could blight it, or they could say that these lands have to be used for, public use. And public use traditionally in eminent domain kind of cases have military uses has been one of those uses, right? That they see as like, okay, this could be a public use. But what is not articulated anywhere by the governor is that these are ceded lands, right? AKA stolen Hawaiian lands, right? And to Kainoa's point about the illegal occupation, when we think about the storied history of the military in Hawaii, it is a storied history, right? And it's more than that. It was the military has that dark history of enabling the overthrow of the monarchy in Hawaii. And so to think that the military can effectively steward the land is something that's a non sequitur, right? It's something that doesn't sit well, and has been proven that they cannot actually do that, right? And this Red Hill consent order that you all signed and then that was put in place in 2015 really showed that even trusting them to take, preventative measures was not enough, right? So I think the question around the military leases is also like, do we continue to entrust these lands and waters to those institutions, right? This institution that has proven itself time and again incapable of protecting them and doesn't recognize, right, from the governor who, and I love this decision that you talked about, Marty, that the state has a duty to malama aina, right? That is, I think we've sort of hit that moment in US politics where people no longer recognize that if you're in office, you're in office for all of the people, even the ones that didn't vote for you, right? And the understanding that that duty to malama aina is a duty that the governor has intrinsically. And the duty to make sure that these lands that are held in trust for Native Hawaiians and for future generations also have to be protected because and acknowledging that history of illegal occupation. So I think that that's going to be, an upcoming challenge, but I think we have to articulate what he is not articulating and have to be able to say, we can't continue to put this as a zero-sum game and think that national security is somehow more important than protecting the next, 7 generations, the future of this Aina. and the future of the water.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone. It's kind of, so one thing that's really, also, struck me is like how connected the military's occupation of Hawaii is to its occupation of other places, in Oceania. And so, to some degree, maybe our conversations here about freedom and liberation from this abusive relationship can also extend to those other places as well. But just to close us out on this part, and then hopefully we'll have time to answer a couple questions. Can we go around and can folks maybe share what your hopes for the future are for Hawaii, for the Pacific, for our planet, and what are your fears, and what do you think we can do to build this a hopeful future, not just for ourselves, but for our children and the 7, 10, 100 generations to follow. Maybe we'll start with Ernie.
You ask a hard question, Wayne, but an important question. I think that what I see is the importance of community, and I think for myself, in a way, in all the ugliness of Red Hill, and all the hurt and pain and trauma that it's created, the one beautiful thing that's come out of it for me, and I've never seen this before, is the ability for a community to come together. All ethnic groups, all cultures, young, old, the ability for everybody to come together in this way to stand up for our Vai is a beautiful thing. And I think our future depends on our ability to come together as a community. Kanaka Maoli, non-Kanaka, everybody on this island, new to the island, born and raised here, we are all part of Hawaii. And our ability to come together as a community will be the key to our future. And that, for future leaders like Kainoa, Wayne, Marti, the future leaders, we need to give them a space to be able to share their mana'o, and for all of us to listen and to come aboard. On the land leases, I'm not really involved with that. But one thing I do, Malama Aina, Aloha Aina needs to be foundational. So if they do occupy any land at the end of the day, they need to make sure that land is healed. If not, we're going to be dealing with a reflection of Red Hill everywhere, wherever they've touched the land, the Aina and the Vai. That's all I had to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. Marti, do you want to follow up?
Thanks. First, before I go any further, I just wanted to correct something I said earlier. I was talking about Puakoloa and I said mamani. Mamani is the tree, the yellow flower, and it's the palila is the bird that is on the verge of extinction, and the military's use of that area is not helping. But to your question, Wayne, so I thought about it, and I thought, for at least, so for the immediate term, what I really want to see is an independent water commission. We have a state water commission whose job it is to, make sure that there's enough water for everybody. And we have seen over the course of Red Hill and other water fights that there's too much politics in the water commission. And I really would rather see the water commission be as independent from the elected people as possible. And just to, highlight Uncle Ernie one more time, the Board of Water Supply is run this way, right? The Board of Water Supply is a nonprofit entity. It is separate from the executive branch of the mayor's office, any of that. And you can see the difference in the quality of advocacy, regulation, support, all of the things, right? The Board of Water Supply was able to make the decisions that needed to be made to be able to stick up for and protect the people of Oʻahu. because they're independent from all the politics. And the Water Commission, by contrast, hasn't been able to do that, despite there being interest and desire and, just heartfelt commitment from many of the Water Commission members. It's an appointed body, but because they're under the thumb of the governor's office, they are not allowed to act as freely as they should, and therefore are having a hard time fulfilling their mission. So that's like a real practical local state law thing I want to see changed, like in the near term. In the medium term, I would really love to see Hawaii become a leader in the filtering and managing of water. I mean, it's in Hawaii's genes, right? Hawaiians are famous for their ability to manage water, make sure everybody got the water that they needed, to take it far distances, making all kinds of awai and like just really bringing for, life to the land through their water management practices. And I think the world could really benefit from Hawaii exporting those concepts and ideas and principles, as well as the science around the filtering of water, because we're going to have to clean everything. Like once we are able to convince the military to take a nap, we're going to have to spend a whole lot of time cleaning house after they're gone. But I think that's a real opportunity, like a way for the world to come together, and the way for Hawaii to help really, contribute towards that transition. And longer term, I would like for us to see, genuine security take precedent over these concepts of national security, which are just like complete BS. I hope that we all learn that our fates are intertwined, and that we need to have tight relationships with our neighbors and, our fellow allies who are geographically near. But then we also need to be, as closely as possibly connected, at least informed about the struggles that are happening around the world, because they are all interconnected. Yeah, and my hope is that when we do that, we work together, we'll be able to, end empire and exploitation from every river to every sea. So.
Marty. Natali, would you like to go?
Yeah, thank you. It's just been such an honor to be in this space with you all, because I know how much heart goes into this work, right? And it's like when everybody else is sleeping, like, you all are still up at night, right? And I know it keeps us all up at night, and we're into our dreams, right? But I guess that's in dreams, like anything is possible. And I think that that's something that time and time again I think about. And there's this beautiful song that I've been coming back to recently, and it's by the singer-songwriter called Silvio Rodriguez, and he talks about, it's called actually The Summary of News, or Resumen de Noticias, and he says, he preferido hablar de las cosas imposibles porque de lo posible ya se sabe demasiado, which means I prefer to speak about that which is impossible, because of all of what is possible, we've heard way too much. So it's this idea, right, that we have the capacity for imagination, and the capacity for innovation, and the capacity for working together. And I really hope, and it's more of a continuation of what I have already seen in Hawaii, which is that incredible capacity to come together in collective action and solidarity and push for things to happen, right? And I think that Hawaii has been, is, and can continue to become a model for protecting water, not just, in an island system or island systems, but also internationally. And then I guess my fear, if there's a fear, is inertia, right? And like the continued trust in the sort of the same institutions that continue to deepen the crises that we are experiencing collectively. It's something that we need to be able to educate about, to understand that our children will inherit these waters and this aina, right? And their children and their children's children. But what does that mean if we leave behind poison water, and we leave behind militarized lands and climate instability And we have a hand in that now, right? We wonder what we could have done. We shouldn't want to wonder, 20 years from now and looking back and seeing, whoa, there was, the 2015 Red Hill administrative consent order, and then there was the 2023 like order to shut it down. And where will we be in 2040, right? And I hope we can be in a space where we're reflecting back and know that we left it all out right on the ground. We did all we could, every single thing we could every single day. And I think to me the antidote to inertia is like pushing every single day just a little bit more, right? And seeing, sharing just a little bit every single day. And what I've seen time and again, and I didn't mention this when we're talking about the military leases, but Hawaii has spoken, right? The people have spoken, hours and hours and hours of countless testimony and Red Hill community meetings, town halls, EPA. There's a need for that. And I see the public comment process and the town hall process and those spaces of civic engagement as one of the last bastions of like civil society where we are able to engage and actually push because our voices still matter. And at the end of the day, those that are in office, that are elected officials, need to listen to the people. And so I continue to believe that solidarity is our greatest strength. And it's an honor for me to continue to be in solidarity with the people and the Aina and the Waiʻi of Hawaii.
Beautiful. Thank you, Natali. Yeah, and I guess to close us out, Kainoa, if you have thoughts to share.
Yeah, whenever I think about dream and vision, it kind of reflects back into the lessons of that past, right? In terms of how even for us who didn't have a system that was, in the same frames of Western law or any of those things, but we're able to take it and, as Marty said, take a good idea and really make it function in a way that was unprecedented at the time and still today. So I think returning Hawaii into that position of being at the crossroads of wisdom and innovation is a huge dream of mine. And to do that, as it was shared too, and I totally support Marty's mana'o earlier in terms of we can expedite what the idea of free Hawaii. And it's not an idea, right? Returning it back to the lawful authority. And I think that requires all of us back at home to deeply understand what that process looks like. So we can go through with the right process forward. If it's an illegal occupation, there's a legal solution. And how do we get behind that process, especially now? I would say too, I feel like a lot of people, there's a lot of dismal attitude. I'm more of an apocalyptimist. I think everything's going terrible and it's all going to end up good in the end. But in that understanding too, the brighter the light, the more distinct the shadow. And I think a lot of people have been doing a lot of good in this world, and it's really revealed. And now we're seeing the pushback of what that push has come down to. You have the equal and cause effect. But in that understanding, now is the time to burn brighter, not to actually hide. So I would argue that now during this time is the time to really unify, to come together and to really think about what it means, how to go from that understanding of solidarity, but to really hold these global contributors to a lot of problems accountable, and how we can stand that up together. And for me, when it comes to the Hawaiian Kingdom again, it's a very easy and practical, as much as it seems like an impractical solution. The legal solution's just there. It's waiting for us to apply it. One thing I shared too, there was a recent gathering in regards to just a lot of the issues that we're having here in Hawaii. And one thing that I've been still questioning as a youth too, who knows there's been so many efforts that have been done before us, but we really need that opportunity to review all the efforts that people have done and really build upon how we can make those arguments better. So I really look forward to when we have that space back here at home, and also for others to kind of get behind this idea again. If you can't heal Hawaii, good luck healing the world. So let's start somewhere. And I truly believe, I will add this last piece of mana'o too, in this Buckminster Fuller sort of model, in terms of if you want to, when you make something so good, it makes other things obsolete. And I feel like when it comes to this idea of the Hawaiian Kingdom and this idea of the return to lawful authority, because knowing we have to update our time since 1893 too, But when we have the opportunity to update it, let's update it in a way that transforms how other people enter governance too. Let's make something so good that it makes other people question what it means to be governed and what it means to govern. So rather than responding to these behaviors and operating sort of in a poison pond and expecting the poison water to clean itself or making bad better, it's time to make something so good that it makes the bad obsolete. So that's the vision that I have, and I think it's more doable than it seems. So definitely look forward to all the great minds that are in this space and the great minds out there to come together to make those things happen. So mahalo.
Thank you, Kainoa. I think everyone can see why I said it was such a privilege for me to be able to moderate this panel today with these amazing leaders and yeah, inspiring folks. I actually think the questions that came in were largely answered in the course of our conversation, and we are at the top of the hour. But if you do have any other questions you like, you can feel free to send them to hawaii.chapter@sierraclub.org. And I have that in the chat for everyone. But otherwise, I just want to again express my deepest gratitude to our panelists today for all of the work that for being here, and also for all of the work that they do in their spaces, in so many spaces, and to thank all of you who are watching. Give up a couple hours of your Sunday afternoon and evening to really sit with us and reflect on what we're going through and how that itself is a reflection of what so many other places and really the planet is experiencing. And so thank you so much for that.
I have one thing I need to add, Wayne.
Yes.
Happy birthday!
Oh, thanks.
Happy birthday, Wayne.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, everyone. Okay, well, with that, please enjoy the rest of your evening, and